Our intel shows he's still on the ship, but he's close.
So that's it. Fortress Inquisitorius.
Oh wow, who's this?
It's impenetrable, Wade.
You know, that Wade guy seems like an interesting character. I hope that we get to see more of him in the future.
Alright, right behind you.
Wade!
They killed Wade? No!
Wade!
Wade! Wade! Why? Why, God? Why? Not Wade! Not Wade! Take me! Take me!
What you say? That is what we need. You decided this. What you say? What did she say? Rinse and notes keep falling out your mouth. Mid-sleep talk news, people look at us. Speak no feeling, no, I don't believe you.
Wade, I know you were on screen for like 5 seconds, but that was the best 5 seconds of my life. You will be missed. Rest in power. Hey guys, Matthew Kadish here, producer of the Salty Nerd Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about episode 4 of Obi-Wan Kenobi, the TV show. Now, if you guys have been watching my videos recapping the previous episodes, you'll know that I'm not a big fan of the show. I think that the writing on display is pretty terrible, and I hate everything about it. But I'm trying to remain as objective as possible in breaking down these episodes, because it's not just about my personal taste as a Star Wars fan, but it's really about the poor craftsmanship that's going into these episodes that we're seeing. Not necessarily from like the directing standpoint, it's mostly from a writing standpoint. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down some of the issues with this particular episode, episode 4, and going into detail as to why they're largely incorrect and how they could have been done better. So the first thing I really want to talk about is the death of one of the greatest characters to ever be introduced into the Star Wars universe, which is the character of Wade, the plucky Underground Railroad rebel, I guess you'd call him, that appears for all of 2 seconds in this episode. And this is one of those things where like it was a very strange choice to me to see this character get such a poignant death in the series. So typically when you're dealing with killing off characters and making their deaths emotionally resonant to other characters in the story and the audience as well, what you typically want to do is you want to spend some time creating an emotional connection and developing those characters so that the audience can identify with them and actually feel something when they die off. And this is basic setup and payoff, right? You set up a character and then you pay off that emotional connection by killing them off. And you've seen this done numerous times very well, particularly in movies like the original Star Wars, Obi-Wan's death, for instance, and Game of Thrones, like when a character died in that, or at least early on in that series, you actually like cared about them getting killed off, like Ned Stark dying and stuff like that. And if you even look at, newer shows like Stranger Things Season 4, where basically you have a series of characters that get killed off in that show kind of early on. And they're minor characters. They're new characters that we haven't seen in previous seasons, and there are 3 of them. And each one basically dies a really horrible death thanks to the main antagonist of that season. But we take at least a couple episodes with each character to get to know them, so that when they do die, like, yeah, you may not be like really broken up about it, but at least like you got to know the character enough to make the death like horrific and meaningful and understand why the characters in the show would react to that character dying in the way that they do. And with this one, like we get introduced to the paths, like, kind of like underground railroad guys pretty early in this episode, and we spend all of like 1 or 2 scenes with them before we get off into the main thrust of the story. And then they reappear back at the end, and I gotta be honest, like when I was watching the show, I had forgotten who these characters were by the time that they showed up at the end to Deus Ex Machina Obi-Wan out of the Imperial Inquisitor Palace. And it was a very strange decision to basically kill off Wade and have his death be like such like an emotional hardcore thing for this other character who I guess was Wade's friend, but we didn't really get to know her that much either. And O'Shea Jackson's character, who basically like we didn't get to know much about him, other than the fact that like, you know, his wife was like a Force-sensitive woman who was killed by the Inquisitors or what have you. So like we got a little motivation for his character, but we didn't really get a sense of the relationships that they had with one another. And so like when Wade gets killed, it's played like this big emotional moment that the audience and the characters are supposed to have like some type of investment in, and it really doesn't pay off. It's really kind of like shallow and like nobody cares. So like when they make a big deal out of it, it's kind of like a strange decision. Now, if we look at this in a different respect, like let's say that they took these 3 characters, the O'Shea Jackson and Wade and his female friend, who are these kind of like true believers who are trying their best to rescue Force-sensitive and Jedi people and stuff like that. And let's say that we introduce them in episode 1, where the Jedi who's on the run on Tatooine, like they're there with him trying to get him safely to like a different planet, and we see them and their efforts to keep this Jedi safe that ultimately prove futile. And that's where Obi-Wan meets them on Tatooine, and they can offer him passage to the planet where Leia's being held, and they kind of go along with him and help him rescue Leia from that planet. And they're chased to the other planets where Obi-Wan has his confrontation with Vader. And we get to see through the course of like 3 or 4 episodes their relationship with one another, their motivation for, you know, doing this stuff, them getting to know Leia, them getting to know Obi-Wan, and the reason why they'd be willing to put their lives on the line to help rescue Leia from the Imperial Inquisitor Palace and all that stuff. And then in episode 4, after 4 episodes of seeing like the smart alecky Wade and like, you know, he's always there with a joke, but he's got a heart of gold and stuff like that, him making the ultimate sacrifice in order to save Leia and Obi-Wan, then that death resonates. That death means something, right? And that's the way that you got to set up character deaths like that. Otherwise, like, you know, he dies and then like you just move on with the story because nobody really cared. It's a lot like Porkins in A New Hope, right? Like nobody really cared about Porkins, even though like, you know, he dies and you're like, oh, that's sad, Porkins died. But, you know, nobody sat around and was like, Porkins, no, he didn't make it, oh my God. So, you know, that's the real difference here, is that they played this death of Wade, the character Wade, who we literally saw for like 2 seconds, as like this big emotional thing that was unearned and undeserved. And they could have set that up throughout the course of the series if they really wanted to, but they didn't. A lot of this stuff felt very kind of like slapdash, like put on at the last minute type thing. And it wasn't really set up well, I guess is my point. So if you're going to have a character die and you want the audience to actually have an emotional reaction to it, spend a few episodes developing that character and setting them up and making sure that their death actually means something to the audience. This is like writing 101 stuff, and it really doesn't make sense to me that a big budget Star Wars TV show doesn't understand this at all. Another thing I kind of want to point out here are character motivations versus plot contrivances. So in this episode, basically, O'Shea Jackson is revealed to be kind of like the guy behind the Underground Railroad for the Jedis, which is called the Path. And after Obi-Wan, you know, basically gets healed in the Bacta tank, he's like, I have to go and rescue Leia. And O'Shea Jackson is kind of reluctant to do so because he's like, well, you know, number one, it's impossible, but number two, it also puts this entire network of ours at risk. And, you know, like I need to pack up and move on and keep on, you know, saving as many Jedi and Force sensitive people as I can. And then Obi-Wan and his sidekick, the Sand Snake, I'm sorry, I forget her character's name because, you know, they haven't really done anything to develop her. They basically go to O'Shea Jackson and they're like, well, you need to help us. And O'Shea Jackson's like, why? And they're like, reasons. And he's like, good enough for me. You got my help. And then like from that point on, he's like fully on board with putting his entire operation at risk, putting his friends and his people at risk to save a little girl that he knows nothing about, who isn't Force sensitive, and to help out General Kenobi, who is a shadow of his former self and just got his butt kicked by the Empire. So I do want to point out that they at least attempt to explain in this episode why O'Shea Jackson's character needs to go and help rescue Leia, and that is because Leia somehow knows everything about the secret underground railroad for Jedi, and that, you know, the Inquisitors are going to get that information out of her, and then the entire network of the path is going to be compromised, and O'Shea Jackson can't leave because he runs everything out of that central hub, and basically if they're discovered, they're screwed, and so he needs to go and rescue Leia in order to prevent that from happening. But there are a couple issues with this, in the sense that, number one, how does Leia know everything about the path and their underground railroad network? I know that in the previous episode there were like these writings on the wall about like all the people that they passed through, and she was kind of exposed to that, and the Sand Snake lady kind of told her a thing or two about, you know, where they were going, but she doesn't know everything about the network. So, I mean, how much does a 10-year-old remember about that type of thing? You know, by the time they actually go and rescue her, she could have already given up all that information to the Inquisitors. So it would make sense that O'Shea Jackson's character would actually spend time relocating his operations in anticipation that the Inquisitors already know where they're at, as opposed to trying to rescue a 10-year-old who somehow knows everything about his secret operation that's so secret the Empire doesn't know anything about it or how it works. So a little bit of a weird thing there. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense within the context of the story as to why O'Shea Jackson would be putting so much on the line in order to help out Obi-Wan. So it's one of those situations where in this scene, they really needed Obi-Wan to basically convince O'Shea Jackson to help him out in a convincing way for the audience, or they needed to put O'Shea Jackson in some type of situation where he had a personal investment in helping out save Leia. So it could be something as simple as, oh, you know, this girl is the daughter of Bail Organa, and if you help us out, I can get Alderaan to support you with equipment and personnel and funds to help fund your railroad and help advance your cause. So basically give O'Shea Jackson's character some type of incentive for risking everything to help Obi-Wan and to, you know, rescue Leia. There needs to be something there, some type of reason why, this is writing term, a reason why characters act the way that they do. And in this one, it's just basically like O'Shea Jackson agrees to help Obi-Wan because the plot requires him to in order to move forward, because Obi-Wan can't do this by himself. And that's just a sign of very lazy writing. So whenever you're watching a TV show or a movie and you're looking at character motivations, you always need to be asking, as a storyteller, what's the reason why this character is acting this way, and is it believable to the audience? Another really big issue with Kenobi as a series is that they seem to keep recycling the same plot line over and over again. So like if you look at episode 4 in New Hope, basically what happens in that movie is Princess Leia gets kidnapped. She gets taken to a secure facility. Obi-Wan and Luke and Han have to break into that facility, rescue Princess Leia, and get her to safety. And it's a typical rescue master plot, right? Like that's how rescues go. So in Obi-Wan episodes 1 through 2, Leia gets kidnapped. She gets taken to a secure facility on a different planet, and Obi-Wan and his allies have to go and rescue her, break into the prison, get her out, and get her to safety. And so they're basically just mirroring what the plot line of A New Hope was, right? But then typically what you want to do after you've completed your rescue plot arc is you want to, take the story in a new direction. So for instance, in episode 4, New Hope, after they rescued Princess Leia, it was then time to do the showdown with the Death Star and have that tense confrontation with the big bad. Whereas in Obi-Wan, instead of going forward with the plot line, what they do is they recycle the plot line. So after they've rescued Leia from the weird criminal planet, they then go and have Leia kidnapped, brought to a different planet, held hostage, and then Obi-Wan and his allies have to go rescue her and get her to safety. And so basically episodes 3 and 4 of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series have the exact same plot arc as episodes 1 and 2, where Leia gets kidnapped, Obi-Wan has to go rescue her. And this is a 6-episode series, right? So wasting time recycling the same plot from the beginning of the series doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In fact, it's just kind of spinning its wheels, which is why I think episodes 3 and 4 feel kind of almost repetitive. Like if they wanted to have the kidnap plot, they probably should have started with the fact that Leia's kidnapped and brought to the Inquisitor Palace, and Obi-Wan has to bring together some allies to Ocean's 11 their way into the palace so that they can rescue Leia, and maybe even have the confrontation with Vader happen at that palace. I mean, there's so many things that they could have done, and they probably could have, extended the rescue plot over the course of actually 4 episodes, as opposed to having one rescue plot number 1 and then rescue plot number 2, and just feel like it's recycling over and over again. And this is another kind of failure of imagination on the writer's part of the show. Because if you think about a show for instance, 24. Now 24 with Kiefer Sutherland was a very uneven show. It varied widely in quality from season to season. But one of the interesting things that they would do with that show is in season 2, about midway through the show, they'd complete a story arc, and then that's the completion of that story arc would then be the catalyst for a whole new story arc. So basically, the first half of the season was one plot line, and the second half of the season was another plot line, but they had both kind of tied together. And so that's kind of what you would think that Obi-Wan would do, where he rescues Princess Leia in the first 2 episodes, and then in rescuing her, he puts the path, the Underground Railroad for the Jedi, at risk. And so now that Leia's safe, he has to go back and save the people who work on the path and ensure that they can still continue rescuing Jedi, and they don't fall to the Inquisitors. And that would be kind of the typical transition that you would do as a storyteller in order to keep the storyline fresh and interesting and moving forward. But instead, these storytellers for Obi-Wan Kenobi just repeat the same plot line over and over again. And that was also a plot line that was basically stolen from the original Star Wars movie. So real lack of imagination here. So we kind of already talked about the recycled plotline aspect of Obi-Wan Kenobi, but this brings us to an even bigger issue with the series, which is that it doesn't seem very well planned out. Now, typically when you're kind of crafting a story, you want to take a 3,000-foot approach where you look at the meta structure of a story and you figure out all the beats that have to happen and where they have to happen, and then you kind of fill in the gaps in between those beats to make sure that they all logically occur in a satisfying way for the audience. And typically what you want to do is you want to look at how many episodes you have of a TV show, and then figure out, okay, in these episodes, what's going to happen and how do we lead from episode to episode, because they're basically treating these series movies, big long movies, right? That's kind of the streaming model right now, where it's not episodic at all. It's all serialized. And when you have 6 episodes of a Star Wars TV show, you would think that they would plan out the structure in a way that actually keeps the story moving forward in a fun and interesting manner. So typically, if you have 6 episodes of TV, you're going to have 2 different types of structures. The first is which you have a 3-act structure in which each act consists of 2 episodes, and you treat it like one big story, right? So the first act is episodes 1 and 2, which leads to the middle act, which is episodes 2 and 3, which propels us into the final act of episodes 5 and 6. And so this is like the big mega movie type thing where you have a 6-hour movie at the end of the day, and each episode of the series acts like a part of the overarching story structure. So that's one way to go about doing it, and that's the way that I think most of the streaming originals have approached the mega movie structure. But the second option that you have is to basically make 2 trilogies, right? If you have 6 episodes, that's 2 trilogies. So you have the episodes 1, 2, and 3 be its own story that's resolved in episode 3, but then that leads into a new trilogy, which is episodes 4, 5, and 6. And so you basically have 2 3-act stories kind of linked together. And that, in a way, would make sense because that kind of follows the model of, the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, right? And this is something where basically, when I mentioned before in the recycled plotline part of this video, that you resolve one story and then midway through you shift gears and go into a different plot line. And that would make sense for this, but oddly enough, it doesn't feel like either of these are being used in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Each episode almost feels kind of disjointed from the other. The first episode is basically about establishing Obi-Wan and his sorry circumstances and all that jazz. And then he leaves and he goes to the planet to rescue Leia in the second episode, and he rescues Leia. And then in the third episode, he fights Vader. And in the fourth episode, he has to rescue Leia again. And it just seems like very almost quasi-episodic. But, they're trying to be both serialized and episodic at the same time. And it doesn't seem to be working. And this is where having someone who really understands plot and story structure, kind of being the steward for the show, would come in handy. And I don't know if this is a unintended consequence of the rewrites that they had to do, but it just seems like there's no cohesive vision for this season, and it's only 6 episodes long, and these episodes aren't even all that long. They're not even a full hour. This episode 4, for instance, was 38 minutes. It was almost basically a half hour's worth of TV. And so you would think that there would be things that the story people could do to utilize the time that they have, because they have a full hour. I believe the first episode was an hour and 10 minutes or something along those lines. It was a longer episode than normal, but they're not limited by anything on streaming, so they can make the episodes as long as they want in order to kind of flesh out some of these characters or explore some of these ideas and kind of follow different story threads and things of that nature. They really have a lot to play with that they're just not doing. And I don't know if that's a budgetary restriction or something like that, but this is an Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show. They should basically have as much money as they want to make the story that they feel they need to tell. And it doesn't seem like they have the budget or the know-how in which to properly tell a story about this beloved character. All right, so let's talk about the character of Reva for a second. And I'm not going to get into the whole kind of controversy surrounding the actress that plays the character. I'm actually just going to want to talk about how the character is treated in the show itself. And what's weird about how they're using the character of Reva is that she's kind of set up to be the primary antagonist of the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show, and yet Darth Vader is actually the primary antagonist of the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show. Vader's the character that Obi-Wan has the most history with. He's the one that has the motivation to hate Obi-Wan and to hunt him down and all this other stuff. And they've kind of used Vader to basically be the driving force behind wanting to hunt down Obi-Wan and stuff like that. And we had that big confrontation in episode 3. And so it's weird because you have these dueling antagonists where you have Vader, whose motivation and history and stuff like that's very well established. And then you have Reva, who, like, we don't really know all that much. She was introduced in the show. She hasn't really established her connection to Obi-Wan, why she's so obsessed with hunting him down, what her past is. We don't really know anything about her. We kind of got a hint that she was at the Jedi Academy when Order 66, was given, and she somehow survived that and ended up becoming an Inquisitor. And she's very ambitious, and she wants to impress Darth Vader and stuff like that. And they're trying to establish her as being very intelligent and crafty and not trusting of a lot of people. And we've had 4 episodes with her so far, and it's just been wildly inconsistent. My friend Matt Vader calls her Darth Burnham in respect to that he's comparing her to Michael Burnham from Star Trek Discovery, where basically like she just kind of like does her own thing and she's always right and she bucks authority and she's the one who's actually like the most competent amongst the bad guys or the good guys or what have you. In that sense, she's kind of a Mary Sue, where she assumes plot things that most normal characters in those situations wouldn't assume. So for instance, in this episode, we have her interrogating Leia not because she wants to use Leia as a lure to bring Obi-Wan to her. What she wants to do is she wants to interrogate Leia to find out everything she knows about the path and, take down that underground railroad for Jedi. However, what reasonable person would assume that a 10-year-old knows everything about a secret underground railroad for Jedi? It's kind of an odd assumption that she would be like, okay, tell me everything you know about this. I would think that Leia would be most useful in basically blackmailing Organa, Bail Organa, to support certain efforts of the Empire or, certain efforts of the Inquisitors or something like that. Or at the very least, Reva knows that Obi-Wan is alive. He escaped Vader. So that she would use him, or she would use Leia as bait to, bring Obi-Wan right to her. So that's kind of a weird thing that, you would think like a 10-year-old would have like the secrets of this underground network that's operated under the nose of the Empire for God knows how many years. Second of all, like when she confronts the Sand Snake later on in the episode, she just automatically assumes that this woman is a spy and that she's giving her false information for some reason. I mean, that's not really the natural assumption that one would have in that situation, because there's no real reason to doubt her, There's no reason to say like, oh, this woman is obviously working against us. And I would think that she would need to do something to draw out something suspicious from the Sand Snake lady in order to figure out, oh, this person isn't being on the up and up, and that's when she goes and does stuff. But at the very least, like she could have just like, used the mind pull stuff to figure out if she was lying or not. And it's kind of funny because like Reva did use this technique on Leia in this episode, and Leia resisted it, and that should have, first of all, probably should have told Reva that Leia was force sensitive in some way, shape, or form. But it also could have established where, she could, she basically says, oh, like you're very stubborn, and that means that like, the force mind pull won't work on you. But at the very least, like she could have tried it on the Sand Snake lady to see if she was in fact a spy and lying and stuff like that. So this is one of those weird like plot hole devices where basically like every time Reva is interrogating someone, or every time she's suspicious of someone, like we're just like, why doesn't she just use the mind pull technique in order to figure out whether or not this person's on the up and up, and if that person can resist it, that's when like she goes into like Inquisitor mode. So very inconsistent stuff here. And also one of the issues that I had with this episode in particular is that Reva basically somehow anticipates that Leia is going to escape. And so she puts a tracker on Leia's little pet droid thing. And when Obi-Wan actually shows up and rescues Leia and escapes, which somehow Reva, anticipated, Darth Vader's very upset with her, but she says like, hey, I put a tracker on them. They're going to lead us to the broader network, and then like we can take down not only Obi-Wan, but all the Jedi. And Vader's very impressed by this. But if you think about it, this is actually where Vader gets the idea to do the exact same thing in A New Hope, where once the Millennium Falcon is captured, he's like, oh, I'm going to put a tracker on the Millennium Falcon and let them escape so that we can, track them down to the actual rebel base and wipe out the rebellion once and for all. And Leia in A New Hope knows that this is the technique that Vader is using. And so if you think about it, it's this episode where both Leia and Vader learn about that tactic, which pays off in episode 4. And I think that the writers thought that they were being clever with this, but it just means that basically the character of Reva was smarter than Vader, and Vader just stole that idea from her. This really should have been a situation where Reva, she's the one doing the active interrogation and stuff like that, but Vader's kind of in the background watching her on a holo and telling her what to do, or giving her orders on how she should be interrogating this, or it should have been his idea to put a tracker on the toy. Vader, one of the things that makes Vader such a great villain, a classic villain actually, isn't just the fact that he's big and dark and dangerous. It's the fact that he's actually very smart. If you look at everything he does in The Empire Strikes Back, he basically sets a trap for Luke and Han and Leia and all this stuff, and they kind of fall into his clutches. And he's very ruthless, and he's very intelligent. And we haven't gotten any of that in Kenobi so far. We've just gotten the brutal side of Vader, as opposed to the evil genius side of Vader. And all the evil genius stuff seems to be relegated to Reva, who hasn't really earned that privilege with the audience, right? So that's a big issue with Reva, and also the fact that we haven't gotten any sense that of what her personal history is. She's not very fleshed out as a character. It's just evil Inquisitor. That's all that we know about her. And with only 2 episodes left, it seems like they're going to be rushing to try to give us some backstory on her, or have some type of arc where she turns to the light side and ends up helping Obi-Wan at the end, or something like that. But the big issue is that she's a main character in this show, and her character hasn't really been handled all that well up to this point. And if she was going to be the primary antagonist of this series, Vader really shouldn't have been involved in this series at all, and it should have been Reva versus Obi-Wan. And throughout the last 4 episodes, we should have gotten some type of sense of what her history is and why she's so obsessed with finding Obi-Wan and defeating him. Another issue that I have with this show is that Obi-Wan, who needs allies and personnel and equipment and money and all this stuff, he should be using the character of Bail Organa a lot more than he is. Now, I understand that they set up in earlier episodes that Bail can't be seen to be, involved in this for political purposes, and he needs to stay on the down low. But it seems like he's just kind of throwing Kenobi to the wolves and being like, go get my daughter, you owe it to me, blah, blah, blah. And he's not giving him any real support. Obi-Wan should be using his little communicator to call up Bail, give him updates, and be like, hey, I need a ship, or I need a crew, or I need equipment, or I need intel, or something like that, in order to help out with the rescuing of Bail's daughter. And you would think that, just logically from a story standpoint, this would be something that the writers utilize in order to make it believable that Obi-Wan can infiltrate a fortress like the Inquisitor Palace, or escape from the crime planet that Leia was initially taken to, and stuff like that. So the fact that Bail Organa just is a non-entity here, when he could be someone who's supporting the path, and he's like, well, I can't hook you up with Alderaan soldiers, but I'm involved in this underground railroad for Jedi, and so I'm going to hook you up with these guys, and these guys are going to help you find Leia and rescue her. Just something like that to make Bail Organa a little bit more of a proactive character in the storyline, to help out Obi-Wan Kenobi and make some of these plot choices a little bit more believable. But of course that would require some forethought and some actual talent in storytelling, and that doesn't seem to be Lucasfilm's strong suit, unfortunately. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about certain creative choices in this episode that really kind of annoyed me. I don't really have, any real justification for disliking these things from a tradecraft point of view. These are just creative choices that I personally found questionable and just detracted from my enjoyment of the episode. So people might subjectively disagree with these things, and they wouldn't be wrong in that respect. But at the same time, there's stuff that I feel like needs to be addressed. So the first thing is how Obi-Wan infiltrated the Inquisitor Palace. It's established early on that there's not a whole lot of intel about this place, and they don't know like how deep underwater it goes. But the way that Obi-Wan infiltrates this palace is that the Sand Snake Lady opens up some type of like underwater vent, and Obi-Wan's able to like swim through there and come up into the bowels of, the fortress. And this is kind of like a throwback to episode 1 where him and Qui-Gon kind of like, swim underwater in Naboo and go to the Gungan city. And so like it's been established that Obi-Wan is a strong swimmer, and as long as he's got a breathing apparatus, he can basically go to any depth and swim as far as he needs to and not get tired or worn out or anything like that. But this episode, or the show, has spent basically like 3 episodes showing us that Obi-Wan is not in peak physical condition. And he just got his ass handed to him by Vader, and he, probably needed to spend more time in a bacta tank. And here he is doing like this really like aggressive swim deep underwater into the Inquisitor Fortress. And it's a very odd choice. Like there should have been something there where like, that assisted him in getting into that, or I really don't know what it could have been, but it was an odd choice to have him just like physically swim into this fortress. But there was precedent for it in episode 1, so I guess like you can't be like too critical of that, but it was kind of odd to me. Another thing that kind of bothered me is how the Stormtrooper armor could deflect the lightsaber strikes that Obi-Wan was dishing out. I mean, like, if it's taken 3 or 4 hits of a lightsaber to take out a Stormtrooper, that's kind of inconsistent because, like, I mean, like, maybe I'm just, not very well versed in how Stormtrooper armor works, but, like, typically the lightsaber would take out a Stormtrooper in one hit because it just slices through stuff, right? Remember that Stormtrooper that fell off the platform in episode 3 and went through those laser barricades and basically got cut in half? Like, lightsabers essentially the same thing, so you would think it would just like cut through like the armor there, but for whatever reason, Obi-Wan was having to deploy multiple hits against Stormtroopers in order to take them down, and whereas like their armor takes 1 hit from a blaster bolt and the people die. It's so inconsistent and so weird that they chose to go that route with it that I couldn't help every time Obi-Wan was like striking a Stormtrooper with his lightsaber. I was just like, why isn't that guy just insta-killing him? Didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Another weird thing is like at the end when the Deus Ex Machina speeders show up in order to save Obi-Wan, all of a sudden those speeders, which are the ships that we saw in Empire Strikes Back at the Battle of Hoth, taking down the AT-ATs, I always got the sense that those ships were just, forward momentum ships, right? But in this episode, it's established that they hover somehow, and like they're able to just hover there like indefinitely. I'm not quite sure how that works because the whole thing about speeders is like they're just in perpetual motion. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they've established in canon that speeders are also hover ships, but it was kind of jarring to see these speeders running around and then like just like hovering in the air when the plot called for it. So I could be wrong about that, but that was another nitpick that I had. But probably the biggest issue with this episode was when Obi-Wan and the Sand Snake were trying to walk through the hangar and escape with Leia, and they just used this big trench coat to cover up both Obi-Wan and Leia as they're walking through. And it's the most ridiculous way of hiding Leia that they could have possibly come up with, because it's so obvious that there's like, someone else under there with like her 2 little nubbly legs like walking alongside Obi-Wan. And I get that, like, there's the joke that stormtroopers can't see very well out of their helmets, but there are plenty of Imperial officers out there without helmets on that obviously could have seen that. And it just really makes the Empire look like ridiculously stupid that they were able to get that far without being noticed. I mean, at the very least, find some type of crate that Leia can hide in that they can drag with them on like a hover thing or like whatever. There were plenty of crates in that hangar that they could have used to justify that. It was just weird, like a little bit of better forethought into that escape probably would have gone a long way in that episode, because as it stands, I mean, that's the type of thing where you're watching a multi-million-dollar Star Wars TV series starring a legacy Star Wars character and a beloved actor and a beloved character and all this stuff, and you're watching that and you're like, is this a parody? Like, is this meant to be funny because it's unintentionally hilarious watching them hide Leia under a trench coat as they try to escape from the most dangerous place they could possibly be in that moment. I mean, it was ridiculously stupid. And speaking of escape, so like they set up that the seeker droids kind of like patrol the area within the Inquisitor Palace. And one of the issues that Obi-Wan runs into is having to avoid these seeker droids. And so like he's very stealth when he's infiltrating the palace and trying to find Leia to rescue her. But the minute he rescues her, all that stealth goes out the window for some reason, and he immediately gets spotted by a seeker droid. Now you'd think that now that he's rescued Leia, he'd be even more cautious about being discovered because he wants to get her out of there safely. But for whatever reason, the second that he rescues Leia, he just rushes into a hallway, and there's a seeker droid right there, and it's like, oh, alarm. Like, I get the fact that they have to, like, kind of, like, up the tension in the episode and make it hard for Obi-Wan to escape, but I feel like there was a better way that they probably could have handled that. Another issue with this episode that I had is that it's the shortest episode that we've gotten so far. I think, not counting credits, the total runtime is 32 minutes. At least that's where I think I stopped it, and the credits started running. And I'm like, 32 minutes for an episode this important. Like, if you're doing an hour-long TV show, right, and the previous episodes have been like 40 minutes to an hour, there's a lot that you could be doing with that runtime, and you really should be utilizing that to flesh out new characters, like Wade. Wade got 2 seconds of screen time. You could have spent like at least like maybe like 3 minutes or something like that with him and his partner so that we got to know them. You could have established that O'Shea Jackson and the Path people are, hiding up in the atmosphere in their ship waiting to rescue Obi-Wan if stuff goes sideways. There was a lot of stuff, like we could have gotten some of Reva's backstory, we could have gotten some during the Back to Tank scene. We could have gotten some flashbacks with Hayden Christensen and Obi-Wan. There was lots of stuff that they could have done with the extra runtime, and they just didn't. And I don't know why that is. It's kind of a strange creative decision. So overall, episode 4 of the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV series, I find, is a very disappointing entry, especially this far in, because this is the episode, if we're following proper like 3-act structure, like what have you, that should be propelling us into like a grand finale. And it kind of sets up the fact that like the Empire and the Inquisitors are going to track down, Leia to wherever it is that Obi-Wan's running to, and they're going to come down there and they're going to basically crush what's left of the Path or like what have you. And I'm not looking forward to the next episode. Like, I'm not excited about finding out what happens next. It's just kind of like weird that there's no tension, that there's no rising action, that there's nothing left other than the fact that we know Obi-Wan is going to have another confrontation with Vader. And, in this episode, we kind of saw Obi-Wan be a Jedi again, which was nice, but at the same time, he wasn't being a very good Jedi. Like, he's still got a lot of rust on him. And it's one of those things where, like, you want this legacy character, this legendary character, this character that we've watched through 2 movies and God knows how many episodes of TV, just be good again, and we didn't get that. And so, like, leading up to these final 2 episodes, it just feels like a meandering narrative. Like it's not building up to anything, even though we know inevitably there's going to be another fight between Obi-Wan and Vader. And that's a problem. Like there's every episode of this series should be leading into a new set of rising action that makes us can't wait to see the next episode. And that's the sign of a well-structured story, is when, like, you know, one episode leads into the next and you can't wait to find out what happens after that. Like, just think about the early seasons of Game of Thrones and things along that line. That's how you properly structure a TV season. With this, it's so slapdash and like weird that, like, we don't know what we're in store for, and we kind of don't care. And that's sad, especially for like a Star Wars series that should be probably one of the easiest wins that Lucasfilm ever had on their streaming service. I mean, like, Book of Boba Fett wasn't all that great, but, you know, you'd think that they'd have a lot more care and talent going into something like Kenobi, and this is, I would dare say, worse than the Book of Boba Fett. Because at least with the Book of Boba Fett, like, there was some rising action from episode to episode, even though, like, that show obviously has, like, most of its problems. But I'm really disappointed with Kenobi, guys, and it just feels like the show gets worse and worse with each successive episode, and there's no consistency between the characters or the plots or the storyline and all this other stuff. And I'm very sad to say that this is a huge failure in my book. Even if they somehow kind of like come back in the last 2 episodes and surprise us and finish strong, basically 2/3 of this series has been wasted up to this point, because, like, we've gotten 4 out of 6 episodes, and the 4 episodes we've gotten have been so wildly inconsistent and just, like, not well written and just bad, just plain bad. And they've mistreated this character so much. It's one of those things where like, you know, if Obi-Wan does kind of like return triumphantly by episode 6, it's almost too little too late. Like, we wanted to see him, you know, in full force for like the past 4 episodes. We wanted to get that feeling of wonder and awe. We wanted the hero worship, you know, from the prequel trilogy and all that good stuff. And we're just not getting it. And I think that this is another failure on the writing part, is because the writers of this show don't seem to understand their audience, like who they're making this show for, and how to give the audience what it is they want. I mean, it's a fine line between giving the audience what they want and, you know, telling a story that is not going to bore the audience, right? But there are ways that you can walk that tightrope in order to, you know, make the story fulfilling for the audience, but also new and exciting. And I think that that's the major failure of the Kenobi series so far, is that the writing team or the producing team or like whoever's at fault just isn't doing that. And they just think like, oh, if we put Ewan McGregor in the Obi-Wan outfit and have him do stuff on screen and fight Darth Vader, that's all the audience wants. And that is what a certain segment of the audience wants, and they're happy with it. But I think for the vast majority of Star Wars fans, they would rather have like a well-told story that is consistent and respectful to the character of Obi-Wan, and respectful to the canon of Star Wars, the stuff that's come before, as opposed to what it is we're getting. Anyway, guys, I want to thank you for checking out this video. You know, I didn't really have a whole lot of time to really sit down and plan out my thoughts on it, because, you know, I'm trying to get this out the day after the show premieres, and it's a lot of work to make these videos, but I really appreciate you guys checking it out. Let me know what you think in the comments, and also check out our other videos on Obi-Wan. Let me know if you agree with my take on those, and the take of my co-host on the Salty Nerd podcast. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you did, because we're working hard to give you great Star Wars content in addition to other pop culture and movie content as well. Anyway, guys, this is Matthew Kadish. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.